A bold move from Mexico could soon make your morning commute more expensive, push car prices through the roof, and even leave you paying more at the grocery store. As tensions between the U.S. and Mexico intensify, this trade war isn't just a battle of tariffs, it's a fight that could hit your wallet where it hurts the most. With Mexico controlling 10% of U.S. crude oil imports and supplying over $50 billion in auto parts annually, the ripple effects are about to be felt across the country. In the latest round of escalating trade tensions, Mexico has put the U.S. in a tough spot, and the fallout could soon impact your everyday life. From a potential $0.5 rise in gas prices to $1,200 increases in car prices, the stakes are high. Mexico is the largest supplier of auto parts to the U.S., accounting for a significant portion of the $50 billion in parts imported each year. Meanwhile, the $1.5 billion loss U.S. farmers could face if tariffs target agricultural exports like corn and beef only adds fuel to the fire. As these two nations square off, it's clear that this conflict is far more than just politics. It's an economic showdown with real consequences for you. Let's dive into the numbers and discover how this trade battle could disrupt your daily life. Let's start with oil, an issue that's both economic and political. Mexico is a major supplier of crude oil to U.S. refineries, particularly those located in Texas. The relationship is deeply entrenched, with Mexican crude oil making up a significant portion of the U.S. oil supply. In fact, Mexico is the third largest exporter of crude oil to the U.S., after Canada and Saudi Arabia. As of 2023, Mexico exports around 733,000 barrels of crude oil per day to the United States, which accounts for approximately 11% of U.S. crude imports. If Mexico decides to restrict this flow, U.S. fuel prices could skyrocket, triggering widespread inflation. According to numerous reports, a significant disruption to oil imports could result in a $0.5 per gallon increase in gas prices. That might seem like a small increase, but for a country that consumes more than 20 million barrels of oil per day, this could mean an additional $21 billion in fuel costs every month. This would be a direct hit to your household budget, especially if you live in an area heavily reliant on transportation for work or business. But there's more at stake here than just higher gas prices. Mexico's potential leverage over oil supplies could serve as a strategic bargaining chip. President Claudia Sheinbaum has hinted that Mexico could take action if President Trump continues to push forward with his tariffs. The goal: undermining Trump's message of American energy independence by revealing the U.S.'s dependence on Mexican crude. This could lead to supply disruptions, pushing U.S. politicians into difficult positions where they may be forced to reconsider their tariff strategy to prevent further economic damage. The automotive industry is next in the firing line. The North American car market is intricately tied to Mexico, with Mexican workers and factories providing vital auto parts like engines, transmissions, and electronics. In fact, Mexico is the largest supplier of auto parts to the U.S., with imports from Mexico accounting for around $50 billion annually in parts. This makes up roughly 40% of the total automotive parts used in U.S. production. A significant portion. American automakers like Ford, Tesla, and General Motors rely on these parts to keep their production lines running smoothly. If Mexico retaliates by imposing tariffs on automotive exports, the consequences could be disastrous. A sudden disruption to the supply chain could leave factories scrambling to find alternatives, driving up production costs. According to automotive industry experts, a disruption of just 2 weeks in the flow of Mexican-made parts could lead to a $2 billion loss in production. Car prices would increase, and factories could face closures or even lay off workers. Imagine the hit to your wallet. If the price of new cars jumps due to higher manufacturing costs suddenly, the car you were planning to buy becomes unaffordable. Even if you don't work in the auto industry, you're still affected. Higher production costs would translate into higher car prices for consumers, making it more difficult for families to afford new vehicles. According to a study by Bernstein, U.S., automakers could see an average price increase of $1,200 per vehicle if tariffs disrupt the flow of auto parts. The car industry is a major employer, especially in states that are politically significant for Trump's base. So if jobs start disappearing in key swing states, the political pressure on the White House will mount. It's a delicate balancing act that could have major economic consequences for everyday Americans. Now, let's talk about politics. Trump's stance on tariffs has been designed to appeal to his base, particularly voters in rural America. But if Mexico targets U.S. agricultural exports like corn, soybeans, and beef, the political fallout could be catastrophic for the president's support. Farmers across the country rely heavily on the Mexican market. In fact, Mexico is the largest importer of U.S. corn, accounting for around 40% of U.S. corn exports. Similarly, Mexico buys 20% of all U.S. beef exports and is the second largest importer of U.S. soybeans. If Mexico imposes retaliatory tariffs on these goods, the financial impact on U.S. farmers could be devastating. For instance, the U.S. Department of Agriculture estimates that a 25% tariff on U.S. corn could lead to a $1.5 billion loss in exports in the first year alone. Farmers would be forced to absorb the increased costs, potentially driving many out of business or forcing them to raise prices, affecting you as the consumer. Higher food prices could become a reality for families across the U.S., especially in rural areas. The political ramifications would also be significant. Trump's core supporters in rural America could feel the squeeze, turning against him if their livelihoods are threatened by tariffs. But despite the rising tensions, Mexico has been careful not to retaliate too quickly. President Claudia Sheinbaum has emphasized that Mexico is committed to the U.S. Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, and would prefer to solve these issues diplomatically. Mexico is buying time by signaling to Trump that while it has plenty of options for retaliation, it wants to keep negotiations open. This approach allows Mexico to apply pressure on the Trump administration without immediately plunging into a trade war. Claudia Sheinbaum's strategy is calculated by holding back on retaliation. Mexico gives the U.S. president the opportunity to reconsider his stance without the appearance of weakness. This could be a game changer for the relationship between the two nations. The scheduled call between Claudia Sheinbaum and Trump on March 6th could determine whether the situation escalates into full-blown economic warfare or if both countries decide to seek common ground. This high-stakes diplomatic move could determine the future of U.S.-Mexico trade relations and, by extension, affect your daily life, from the price of goods to the availability of jobs in certain industries. Now, this conflict isn't just a two-player game. Canada and China are also in the mix. Canada has already hinted at potential retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods, particularly in the automotive sector. If Mexico and Canada both take action, the U.S. could find itself under economic pressure from two sides. Disruptions to trade between these three countries could trigger a widespread economic shock. This situation is complicated further by China's tariffs on American goods, adding another layer of economic friction. If all these countries act in unison, it could create a domino effect, pushing the global economy into turmoil. According to Goldman Sachs, a full-scale trade war involving the U.S., Mexico, Canada, and China could result in a 0.5% drop in global GDP, exacerbating inflation and slowing down economic growth worldwide. You could see prices for everyday items, from electronics to groceries, increase. And if the economic pressure becomes too intense, we could be facing recession-like conditions, making it even harder to make ends meet. The interconnectedness of the North American economy means the ripple effects of this trade conflict would be felt by everyone. As we've discussed, energy supplies are a major piece of this puzzle. Mexico's ability to disrupt U.S. oil flows could expose weaknesses in the American energy system. Trump has repeatedly touted the idea of U.S. energy independence, but Mexico's role in providing specific grades of oil that domestic U.S. production can't match challenges that narrative. If Mexico cuts off oil exports, the impact could go beyond just rising gas prices. American refineries could be forced to scramble for alternative sources, potentially driving up prices further. According to the EIA, a disruption in the flow of Mexican oil could lead to a 20% spike in gasoline prices in the short term. further compounding the inflationary pressures already at play. At the same time, President Claudia Sheinbaum's nationalist rhetoric gives Mexico a strong position on the global stage, strengthening her political standing at home and in international negotiations. By standing firm, Mexico also makes a statement about defending its sovereignty, making it clear that it won't be bullied by U.S. policies. This positions Mexico to play a larger role in reshaping global energy dynamics. So, where does this all leave us? Whether it's higher gas prices, costlier cars, or disrupted supply chains, the repercussions of this trade conflict will be felt in everyday life. The balance of power between Mexico and the U.S. will determine much of the economic landscape moving forward. What do you think? Will Mexico's countermeasures push Trump to back down, or will he double down on tariffs? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more updates on this unfolding saga.
Operation and transportation of goods from farms to markets. The end result? Higher prices for food, which would directly affect consumers. This is not a hypothetical scenario. Food inflation has been a growing concern in the U.S., with the Bureau of Labor Statistics reporting that grocery prices rose by 2.9% in 2024. In particular, livestock farmers and grain producers who rely on energy-intensive processes might find themselves squeezed by these rising costs, ultimately passing those higher prices on to consumers. Technology and electronics. The impact on manufacturing costs. Next, let's consider the technology sector, which is deeply tied to both rare earth metals and energy resources. Canada is a significant supplier of critical minerals like lithium, nickel, and cobalt, all of which are essential for smartphones, electric vehicles, and laptop computers. According to a report by Natural Resources Canada, Canada holds approximately 10% of the world's cobalt reserves. These minerals are crucial for the production of high-performance batteries, and disruptions to Canada's export supply could increase prices for these materials, making tech products more expensive to manufacture. The consumer electronics industry could feel the pinch. Manufacturers of devices like smartphones, tablets, and laptops would face rising costs for the raw materials needed to make their products. This could lead to higher prices for consumers, especially as demand for tech products continues to grow globally. In 2024, global smartphone sales were estimated at 1.22 billion units according to Canalys report. And any price increases due to material shortages could have a significant economic impact. Additionally, the transition to renewable energy technologies, which relies heavily on the same minerals, could slow down, hindering the growth of green tech solutions. In fact, many solar panels, wind turbines, and electric vehicle batteries depend on Canadian-sourced minerals, so any export restrictions could stifle the clean energy movement. Energy-dependent sectors, from manufacturing to transportation. Let's talk about energy-dependent industries. Think about transportation, logistics, and manufacturing. These industries rely on a steady supply of affordable energy, especially oil and electricity. If Canada cuts off oil exports, or if energy prices surge due to grid instability in the U.S., companies in sectors like shipping, airlines, and construction could see their operational costs skyrocket. A spike in gasoline or diesel prices would likely lead to increased shipping costs, which would then be passed on to consumers. Similarly, the airline industry relies heavily on oil for its jet fuel. If fuel prices rise due to Canadian oil export restrictions, ticket prices would likely follow suit, and passenger travel could decrease, especially for budget-conscious travelers. Construction also suffers from rising energy prices. The National Association of Home Builders, NAHB, reported that energy costs represent about 7 to 10% of the overall cost of construction projects, including both residential and commercial buildings. If electricity prices rise or if there are disruptions in the supply of materials from energy-dependent sectors, the construction industry might face delays or higher prices for projects, further driving up housing costs. Section 7. Energy Geopolitics and Political Economy. Before we wrap up and talk about the real-world consequences, let's take a moment to dive into some theoretical concepts that help explain why energy exports and trade wars have such profound effects on global economies. One theory that's highly relevant here is energy geopolitics, which looks at the way countries use their energy resources as a form of political leverage. Essentially, energy isn't just about supply and demand, it's also about power. Countries with substantial energy resources, like Canada, can influence political outcomes by controlling access to that energy. This is often referred to as resource diplomacy, where energy becomes a tool for shaping international relations and securing national interests. In the case of Canada and the US, Canada is in a unique position because it is not just an energy supplier.